Welcome to the Kyle Report. And we are live, coming to you live from the L.E. Phillips Memorial Library. This is October 3rd, Fred, isn't it? 9 p.m.?
Absolutely.
Yep, October 3rd, 1994. And
all day.
as usual, Fred, we have a lot to talk about. And with us tonight, we have a special guest, drove all the way up from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and his name is Michael Riley, and he's the president of Wisconsin Term Limits. I want to welcome you to the show, Michael.
Thank you.
Call you Mike, okay?
You bet.
All right. And as usual is my rusty and trusty sidekick, Fred, the Truth Stafford. And
good evening.
Glad to see you made it, Fred. You were at another rambunctious county party meeting of the Republican Party tonight. How'd that go, Fred?
Very good.
Well, that's good. All right. We got a lot to talk about tonight, and the main subject is going to be term limits. Now, Mike, term limits seems to be a hot issue all of a sudden. For years, it kind of languished. I remember a candidate right here in Eau Claire used that as one of his issues in his campaign, and just didn't seem to take off a year ago. But now it seems to be hot all over the country. Why is that in the last year that it's really picked up steam?
I think it's basically because the public has lost more faith in their government than they had before. There's an incredible precedent for term limits, Chuck, and it's rippling across the country. Our United States president is now limited to 2 terms. We've got 38 governors who have limited terms. We've got 15 states that have limited the terms of their congressmen in the voting booth. We've got 18 state legislators that are limited by the vote of the people. And we've basically got about 240 cities that we know of in the country that have term limits on their mayor and aldermen. We even look at the United States Coast Guard, and we see term limits there. After 2 years, the leader's got to step down.
Oh, that's kind of unusual. Okay, now, what's the problem with government that makes people not trust it and start talking term limits?
Elected officials as a whole just do not manage well, and I think you can look at different people have different reasons why they want term limits, but across the country term limits is favored by about 75% of the population. But let me just give you some examples. At the federal level, we just recently had a crime bill that was passed that had about $7 billion worth of wasteful programs in it, wasteful social programs that aren't going to have a whole lot of impact on crime. We've got a federal government that recently wanted to sweep away our health care system, even though about 85% of the American public said their system was okay. And the Congress wanted to replace it with a government-run system. We've got bills that are 1,300 pages and nobody bothers to read them, but yet they're introduced in Congress. One group even introduced a pledge, trying to get the congressman to pledge to read the bill before they would introduce it. These are some of the problems we see. And then at the state level, just to cite a few more examples of why people aren't confident in their government. At the state level, we saw a recent state referendum for a pay raise for legislators that said if a no meant yes and a yes meant no. And then in the city of Wauwatosa, we had a vote that should have been a binding vote on the cross. The Wauwatosa citizens wanted to leave the cross on their city emblem. And there was a binding vote taken, and the public overwhelmingly said, leave the cross on the emblem. And the city fathers chose to ignore it. So the public has lost faith in their government.
So are you trying to say that possibly these guys get embedded, especially in Washington with all the special interests and stuff, and they no longer are in touch with folks back home?
You bet. They lose touch and they get disconnected.
Now, going along with that is, I heard something interesting the other day that somebody was suggesting for the federal level is not only limit the House of Representatives and the senators, because we already have a presidential term limit, but limit their staff too. Now, have you heard anything, has anyone talked about the staffs of these guys?
Well, of course, if you term limit a federal congressman, when he leaves, his staff's going to go with him, so you've eliminated the staffers right there. So term limits will accomplish staff limits too.
All right. Now, there's a lot of term limits already in place, you were saying previously. How many states actually do have term limit? Well, first of all, today is Monday. The United States Supreme Court's back in session. They're going to discuss this whole thing, and this they're going to be deciding on that here in the next few days.
Well, indeed they are. In the state of Arkansas, the citizens voted to limit terms of their state legislature and of their federal congressmen. And an Arkansas Supreme Court said, hey, it's okay to limit the state legislature, but not to limit your Arkansas congressman. So that case has now made its way to the Supreme Court, and it's next up. The Supreme Court will look at that case, will hear the arguments this fall, and then a decision should be made by next summer on that issue. And the issue is, the Arkansas citizens are saying, yes, we can limit the terms of our congressmen. And the people who are filing against the citizens are saying, no, you can't limit the terms of the congressman, it's unconstitutional.
Okay, now, going along with that, how are you going to make this thing equal across the country? Because it's in some states, they've already agreed to this. Other states are fighting it. Just recently in Washington, there was a primary, and I think it would just squeak by in that state. But in other states, there's vast majorities saying we want term limits. But other states haven't voted on it or will be voting on it in November. But how are you going to make it uniform nationwide?
That's a good point. I must tell you that quite a number of states has already sought to limit their terms, and about 15 of them. And I would say that as more and more come online, there will be pressure for Congress to introduce a term limit bill in the Congress. There are some already introduced, but they get killed in committee. But as more and more states come online with term limits, vote of the citizens, there's about 15 now voted on their term limits. About 4 more will be on the ballot, or perhaps 5 more states will be on the ballot for congressional term limits in November. And I'm saying to you that as more and more states come online with congressional term limits, it pushes Congress into the position where they need to vote on a term limits bill.
Now, will they try and push us so it's an amendment type deal where 2/3 of the states or whatever have to agree to it, or will just voting on it and passing it in Congress, will that be enough?
That's a good question. I haven't pondered that really. I know at the state legislature level here in Wisconsin, you could do it either way. You could have a bill, and there was a term limits bill introduced in our state legislature in the last session. It died in committee. Or you could have the 3-part constitutional amendment process where the state legislature has to approve it in 2 successive sessions, and then at the 3rd step, it has to be approved by the public here in Wisconsin on a referendum question. And Congress, I think, could go either one of those 2 ways at the federal level.
Okay, we want to remind the viewers that we are taking live calls tonight, and the number is 839-5067, and we do have a couple calls waiting. And if you look down in the, well, I guess it would be your left-hand corner just below Fred there, is a poster. 1994 term limits poster child, and that's a picture of Rostenkowski. Now, why did you pick Rostenkowski, or why was this a national poster or a state?
Well, it's a national poster, and I think Congressman Rostenkowski just plain screwed up the worst. He had 18 terms and 17 indictments. So he's done some things that just aren't proper, and he's going to be he's indicted for them, and of all those indictments, he's got 4 indictments against him that are heavy-duty ones, and he could even spend some time in jail.
They seem to love him in Illinois, though. They just pushed him through the primary. He's into the general election again.
That's because he's a powerful committee chairman, and that's why voters vote for him in Illinois.
He's kind of stepped down temporarily from that.
Yes, he has now.
Position.
Yes, he has stepped down.
Now, since we've got the poster on there, what's the deal on that? That's a free poster, and do you want to tell the folks where they can get a hold of that poster if they want one?
I'm the president of Wisconsin Term Limits. We're the statewide organization, but there's also a national organization called U.S. Term Limits. And U.S. Term Limits created this poster, and if you'd like one, you can call 1-800-TERMS-94, 1-800-TERMS-94, and they'll send you one of these posters free of charge.
Okay, it's a nice little poster. I'm sure some of the college students would like to get a hold of that, and we'll probably have a phone number at the bottom of the screen where if we can get it big enough where you can read it, that you can call and get one of those free. Now, the Wisconsin Term Limits, is that a nonprofit organization?
Yes, we are.
501, what, 4 or C4? Or
We're a Wisconsin corporation filed as a nonprofit.
Okay, you're nonprofit, but contributions are not tax deductible?
No, they're definitely not tax deductible. It's,
Okay.
we're in a gray area.
All right, I'm sure that'll be argued back and forth probably. And then the national one, U.S. term limits, you're kind of an umbrella with them, but you're a separate, you stand alone.
Yeah, we're distinct from them. We basically have no direct connection, but we cooperated a lot with U.S. term limits. They've given us a lot of material, backgrounding us on information about term limits. They showed us how other petition drives were set up in other states, and so we've asked for their advice and counsel a lot.
Okay, I think we're going to take a phone call here, and then while we're taking that, you might be wanting to think about telling us about how things are happening, going here in the state. I know you were over at the United We Stand Citizens Fair earlier this year,
Yes,
back in
I
July.
was. Yeah, you bet.
Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Fuck you, fucking redneck.
Well, live programming here on Public Access, we do get problem callers, and we do have the caller ID set in place now, so that guy there could be getting a call from the police department tomorrow for his foreign language there. We only have English language. We try to keep this an English language program. Sometimes we get foreigners like that on there that can't speak English, and we just cut them off. So it's no reflection on you. It's just we're in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It's just different up here. But we want to warn the folks that we'll take your calls, and we appreciate you calling in, but please keep your language clean and keep it English. Right, Fred?
Absolutely.
We are in an English-speaking county here in Wisconsin.
Well, I hope so.
Eau Claire County is still an English-speaking province.
Oh,
the state of Wisconsin.
They speak Norwegian here.
Okay. Now, Fred, we do have a couple more calls waiting. But Fred, you know what part of the show this is?
What part is it?
Well, this is a part of the program where we ask the guest a question.
Well, go ahead. Let's hope you can answer it.
And this date in history is what the question is. And we've got 4 dates, October 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And so we're going to be picking from those 4, but it's the date in history. And on this date, October 1st, well, actually a couple days ago, 1961, this is a baseball question.
Aha.
And, you know, there was a famous home run hitter named Babe Ruth who had the record of 60 home runs up till that summer, 1961. There was a pair of heavy hitters out there in New York that were just hitting them right and left. And one of them finally hit one over the fence for number 61. So the question...
His name is
wait,
Roger...
whoa, I'm asking him, Fred.
Okay.
We got a guest tonight.
I know his
Okay.
name.
See, Fred's stepping all over you here.
Mickey Mantle.
So who was that man that summer, or that actually into the fall, October 1st, 1961, hit that 61st home run and still in the record books?
I remember that. I watched it. I think it was Roger Maris.
That's right. And for winning, we're going to present you with a bottle of Flavin Pop from the wonderful world of Flavin.
I wouldn't drink it if I were
And you can take that with you after the show, because the program is brought to you by Flavin folks. They came over from the old country, settled here in the Chippewa Valley many, many years ago.
I've been selling that poison ever since.
Now, Fred, since you're so eager, we're going to ask you one. October 3rd, Fred. Now Fred's been batting 1,000. I mean, he's been going like this now for months. Batting 1,000 ever since the baseball strike. He's the only ball game in town hitting 1,000. Fred, this is going to be a tough one. I don't know if you can make it or not.
I don't think so.
So I'm going to skip to another date. October 2nd, Fred. 1967. The first African-American Supreme Court justice was named. October 2nd, 1967. Just retired a few weeks ago, and
Yes.
as a matter of fact, his successor took his seat today.
Yes.
27 years later.
I know who you mean. He was active in civil rights.
His name is the same as what they had right after World War II when they went into Europe, and they had that plan.
Yeah.
The blank plan. Remember that to fix
Morgenthau
up?
plan?
No, to fix up Europe.
I know this one.
Yeah, that's...
Well, to keep Fred's record intact, maybe we better let him answer it, Fred.
All right, go ahead.
All right.
I can't think.
I think it's Justice Thurgood Marshall.
That's right.
I couldn't think of his name.
Okay. Boy, Fred, we saved you on that one. All right. We're going to take another call here, and hopefully we have the language problem straightened out. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
This is for your guest.
All right.
How long has your organization been in existence?
Wisconsin Term Limits was started May 24th of this year, so we've been in
Okay.
just several months.
Why can't you just make this a state issue? Why do you have to work through the federal government? Even though we have federally elected representatives, can it be a state law for all elected officials in the state to have restricted terms?
Well, our problem is we don't have a mechanism that citizens can use statewide.
Well, what about the initiative referendum? Why can't we get that done too?
That would be a neat idea. Then we could go statewide and do one petition drive and get the job done.
Okay, Chuck, wasn't there a group effort to put the initiative referendum in place in the state of Wisconsin to do battle with those socialists down there in Madison? Those people?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. We have referendums in Wisconsin, but they're not binding.
Yeah, only local municipalities can have
As
referendums.
far as
Yeah.
statewide ones, so they've conveniently done that in this state, and it really hampers people that want to, through the referendum process, want to kind of do an end run around a recalcitrant bunch down there in Madison that doesn't want to listen to the will of the people. You can do an end run and have a binding referendum.
Okay, well-
Well, in this state, they've conveniently eliminated that process.
Wasn't there a group last year that took the initiative and is circulating petitions statewide to get the initiative referendum in the state of Wisconsin?
I think there was Wisconsin Citizens for Legal Reform was trying to get the initiative referendum process installed in Wisconsin. They have not yet been successful. 34 states, for the caller's information, and what the caller's referring to, 34 states have the initiative referendum process.
Oh, okay. Maybe you know the guest. Do the Democrats or the Republicans prefer this
Excuse me.
one party over the other?
Excuse me, caller. Chris and Cliff Economaki, are you still in there in the control room? Cliff, can you turn the camera over to the guest when he's speaking there? There you go.
There he is.
Okay.
That's what the guests look like.
Yeah, I know, they were kind of, Chris and Cliff, the Siamese twins of engineering. Fred, have I ever told how they made it down here to
You only too often.
Okay. All right, now what was the question again, caller?
Gosh, I've forgotten.
Well,
The initiative referendum. I think there was a group, and I don't know what happened to that movement.
it has not succeeded. It's the initiative referendum process to install it is kind of a difficult one because all these the state legislators don't want to give up their power, and they.
Okay, does that include both parties? Does one party, the Republican or the Democrat, do they have a keener interest in seeing the initiative referendum take shape in the state of Wisconsin?
Not to my knowledge. I think both parties are resisting the idea.
Okay, they are. They like the perks.
They like the power and they don't want to give it up. They see the state legislators would see the initiative referendum process as a threat to their power. 34 states in the United States now have the initiative referendum process. The process we have is State Statute 9.20. It's the direct legislation petition process, and it allows citizens in Wisconsin that are in a city or a village to petition and make things happen in their city and village. But it doesn't apply statewide. It doesn't apply to the school district or the county government or the state government.
Isn't that convenient? It's almost like, hey, if you want to learn how to set up a socialist state where the people don't get to speak anymore, their voice isn't heard except through their elected officials, set it up under 9.2 there.
Yeah, we only have a very limited process in Wisconsin.
No wonder we're one of the highest tax states in the country.
That may account for some of it.
You know, I think if we did have that initiative that was binding, I think we could change a lot of things that the boys down in mostly boys, it's still pretty much a boys' game down there, don't want us to. So how can we tie that in with term limits, or is there a way we can tie that in and get that ball rolling?
Oh, well, term limits kind of goes in that direction.
Yeah.
it shows what the public can do. I think the public in about 40 cities and villages now have petitioned to put term limits on the ballot as a question, and the elected officials have resisted this in cities and villages, and they've thrown down the gauntlet trying to prevent term limits from coming as a ballot question. And so far we've been successful in getting like 5 cities and villages on the ballot for November. We just this morning, Wisconsin term limits, this morning in the federal courthouse in Milwaukee, we filed a lawsuit against 18 different cities and villages that citizens have petitioned to put term limits on the November ballot. And so we're hopeful that by intervention of a federal judge located in Milwaukee, that we can indeed succeed in having this term limits referendum question forced onto the ballot in these 18 cities and villages that are illegally preventing it right now.
Good. Do you have specific term limits for each elected official, or how many term limits are you suggesting?
The petition was divided into 2 parts. The first part was a binding referendum question on local officials. For example, the city of Milwaukee. It limited the mayor and the alderman to 2 terms or 8 consecutive years, and then they would have to step down 1 term before they could serve again. So they were limited to 8 years in a row, and they had to leave, and they couldn't come back until 1 term had gone by. The second part to the question that would be on the ballot would be an advisory question on the state and federal, our state legislators and our federal Congress. The advisory question on the state representatives would be to limit their terms to 4 terms of 2 years or 8 years total for state representatives. And for state senators, it was 4-year terms times 2 terms, 8 years total for state senators. Then for the federal representatives, it was 3 terms times 2 years, that's 6 years total for federal representatives. And for federal senators, it was 2 6-year terms or 12 years total for federal senators.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your lawsuit that you just filed there, who are some of the main people you're going after, or the main groups? I thought I saw a couple of groups there besides cities.
Yes, the Wisconsin term limits lawsuit that was filed this morning in the federal court in Milwaukee goes after the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, the City of Milwaukee, the Common Council of Milwaukee, and after numerous, about 17 other city clerks or common councils, whoever's involved in those 18 different cities that we filed against. Okay. And the League of Municipalities in Wisconsin has been stacked against us. They've just advocated defeating term limits on a whole variety of technical reasons to prevent it from going on the ballot. And so we're asking them to step in front of a federal judge and explain why they're doing that.
So this League of Municipalities, that's basically, municipalities means towns, cities.
You bet.
And they're saying, hey, we like what we're doing here. We don't want somebody coming in and telling us we got to get out in so many years.
That's the basic idea.
Yeah.
And we're telling them that, hey, now you can stand in front of a federal judge and explain why you're preventing term limits, the referendum question, from being on the November ballot.
Okay, Fred, I know you've been eagerly awaiting over there to ask Mike a question, so go ahead and shoot.
Has the interest been increasing in support of term limits?
That's a good question, Fred. Indeed it has. When we first came on the scene in Wisconsin in May of this year, there was a certain height of public awareness of term limits. And then since all of the activity of these citizens petitioning in their different cities and villages, at least 40, and I'm sure there's some more now, yes, citizens are very aware of term limits. They're aware of the concept. And in a recent survey, 75% of Wisconsin citizens favor term limits for Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm looking at a Wall Street Journal, NBC survey. It says, do you favor a limit on congressional terms? 80% favored, 17% were against. That's an older, that's back in April of '92, but I mean, that's quite overwhelming, to get 80% to agree on anything.
Oh, you bet, Chuck. The polls consistently show that the public favors term limits. For congressmen, it runs anywhere from 67% up to about 80% that you just cited in that survey. For local elected officials, a recent survey we've seen here in Wisconsin showed that 66% of the public was in favor of term limits for local elected officials. So there's support in the public in Wisconsin, both for federal, state, and local levels of government for term limits.
Okay, there was the Luntz Research Companies asked a question recently, should members of Congress be limited to 3 terms or 6 terms? 3 terms was agreed to by 82%, 6 terms by 14%.
That's a pretty strong statistic. When that Luntz Research Associates showed that 75% of Americans favor term limits for Congress, and then they further showed that of that 75% that favored term limits for Congress, a full 82% of those favored only 6 years for congressmen to serve, and then they'd have to step down.
Well, I'm running for Congress myself, and I've agreed to step down after 8, but after this I might have to change my literature and lower it down to 6 years.
There's some disagreement on this, Chuck. The Republican Party just stepped out a few days ago and had, I think there were 300 of them that were...
Contract with America.
Yes, and one of the things in there was term limits. And they said that these Republican, I think they were all incumbents, were they not? Or, well, wait a minute.
Incumbents or wannabe incumbents.
Or, yes, incumbents or those that were running for office. Right. I believe it included both groups. Yeah. And those Republicans stood on the Capitol steps and in Washington, D.C., and they said, here's our 10-point plan. And one of their key points was term limits. And I think they thought of a 12-year limit. They wanted a 12-year limit on federal senators and a 12-year limit on federal representatives. So most of the public doesn't favor a term that long, though. Most of the public favors 6 years only.
What about, say they serve their 3 terms, they lay out 2 years. Can they come back and serve again? Or is this
Indeed they could.
A lifetime deal?
Under our plan that we've petitioned for, Wisconsin term limits and U.S. term limits, once they stand down for 1 term, they could indeed, they could indeed run again. It's not a death sentence, so to speak, so they could run again after they sat out 1 term.
Now, what about, a lot of them, after they retire from U.S. Senate or House, they go into lobbying. I know there's some bills trying to limit that, too, where they have to lay out for at least 1 term, maybe 2 years for a congressman or 2 years for a senator, where they can't just step back in as a high-priced lobbyist and come right back in there.
I would favor such a bill. Yeah, I think it's 1 year right now. Yeah. After you leave, like if you're let's say if you're a cabinet level person at the White House and you leave that office it's my understanding that for 1 year you cannot come back there and lobby, and maybe that should be extended to a greater length of time.
Well, what these big groups like, they like a former congressperson to be a lobbyist, because there is a law that says that a congressman can walk onto the House floor, whether he's still in office or not, anytime he wants to.
Oh, really?
And so he can walk right down there and lobby John Doe, United States Congressman from Wisconsin, right when they're in session.
I see.
And so they like those guys. They like to use them as lobbyists. So a lot of former congressmen are lobbyists.
Okay, that's true. That's true that a lot of them are.
They can walk right down there and twist arms right in front of the C-SPAN cameras.
I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we're going to check to see now if we got that line cleared up, Fred. Chris and Cliff were in there working frantically on the lines. And Fred, we have a bevy of beautiful, voluptuous women in there.
We do?
Answering the phones. We've changed that because of the PC movement. We no longer call them beautiful broads. They're voluptuous women now.
I didn't see anyone that came in.
Well, they're in there now. You're on the set, so you can't see them. So we're going to see if we're on the air. Go ahead, caller.
Hello?
Yes.
How are you doing tonight?
Fine.
That's good. Yeah. I like this guest. He's pretty cool because he's explaining the stuff that we want to hear.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Uh-huh.
And then there's Chuck and there's Fred. I think you're both fucking...
Well, the college is back in up here.
Uh-huh.
So we have some of the more educated students calling in.
Yeah, I can see that's an educated one.
And you know, Fred and I have discussed this many times on the program, but did you know that in Eau Claire, the school district has over $6,000 that they give per student for education? And we've really spent our money well. You can tell when you get to some of the younger callers. It's, you know, $6,000. Fred's from the Catholic faith, and there's a school called Regis here in town where for $2,000 you can get a fine education where the kids, their SAT and ACT scores are higher than the public schools. $2,000. Here we get $6,000 to get that kind of quality young people. What do you think about that, Fred?
Terrible.
That's one of the reasons why, Fred. I don't know if you've been pushing this, but I have, to make it legal to have non-binding, no strings attached vouchers, so the parents can send their kids to the best school, not only to the public school. So let's see now if we can get back to a decent caller. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Hey, Chuck, I was watching news tonight, and looks like the military invaded a bunch of joints down in Haiti. I was wondering what they were. I can't remember. Or didn't you catch the news?
You mean the occupation down there?
Yes.
Did you hear something about some?
Well, where the militia had their headquarters, they went in and took the arms and away from them, arrested some of them.
They put a bunch of the Haitian police and I don't know if they placed them under military arrest, but they carted them off because they were expressing violence or something like that. They all looked pretty docile to me when they were in the truck. You know, none of them looked like they were gonna attack anybody, and they really didn't give a good reason for putting the Haiti police in there. There probably was, I'm sure there was, but they didn't explain it.
Well, they're probably feeling very relieved that the Americans came in and rescued them and got them out of there, because there's a lot of people seeking vengeance on all sides down there, and there is groups that have been vying for power in Haiti for dozens of years, and one group gets on top, they make a lot of enemies. So now we got American troops in there that are actually disarming one faction and leaving them helpless to the hordes that are lining up to ransack, as you've seen on TV in the last few days. The military goes in there and chases off the owner of a warehouse, or chases off the guard that's guarding the place with a shotgun, and then they ransack the place. That's the kind of democracy that we're helping set up down there. Mob rule. And so we have to be careful that we don't just disarm one side and then we have a massive retaliation where there's hundreds of people that are just out and out murdered, because Aristide has done that once before, and he's gave famous speeches on necklacing his enemies, and they're paving the way for him to come back in a few days here. Hopefully he doesn't call for the necklacing again of his enemies. So we're seeing some of the mob rule down there. We're seeing them carting off the bags of rice and the furniture and anything that's not bolted down.
Who's running the police down there? I mean,
well, there's been chaos ever since a guy named Papa Doc was in power. Then his son, Baby Doc, took it over. Baby Doc had to leave, hopped in a car, raced to the airport, hopped on in the plane and disappeared with millions of dollars. Then Aristide was put in there, and Aristide handpicked Cedras as his head of the military. Handpicked this guy to protect Aristide and to help set up a democracy down there. Well, Cedras was supposed to be on Aristide's side, but Cedras watched Aristide start plummeting, looting the countryside, throwing mayors out, sending his Marxist thugs out into the countryside and overthrowing mayors that he didn't like. Then he started calling for the necklacing of people, and he actually one night he sent his thugs out and they killed over 100 people. Fred says he's seen photographs of Aristide in the crowd while they're necklacing a guy.
That's true.
So anyway, Cedras got fed up and overthrew Aristide, kicked him out of the country. But now Cedras says he's willing to step down if there is a amnesty, so that he's not held responsible for all the chaos down there. Which when you're in a transition like this, there is chaos, and now we've got the Americans right in the middle of the thing, and it still could go plenty of different ways. That's why they're trying to disarm as many people as possible. But there's it's a serious situation down there. We could be. They're saying that they're pulling out some troops, but we could be bogged down for quite a while down there.
And I got a question for your guest there.
All right.
I was wondering who's actually paying your salary and how is everything getting funded? Is this by the lawsuits that you're filing, or what's going on?
No, we don't get much of a salary, that's for sure. Some amount of money has come from U.S. term limits and has flowed to Wisconsin term limits, and some of that money was collected in Wisconsin. So there isn't much money flowing around, and we'd like to have more to do more things, but it's just we have very limited resources. Most of the work is done by, most of the petition work is all done by volunteers in the field that are unpaid. So it's mostly a citizen effort, and if you believe in having term limits, then you're willing to invest lots of time, as all the staff in Wisconsin term limits have. They've invested an incredible amount of their time. And for a while there, we were going 7 days a week, about 3 weeks in a row. It was really hot and heavy. And so if you believe in term limits, you're willing to do that. And if you don't, then that's another matter.
Mm-hmm.
These are lawsuits that are, I don't even know if they're called lawsuits, that you're filing in Milwaukee. Well, what do you get out of that?
The only reason we're having the lawsuit filed in Milwaukee is because we simply want to put term limits on the November ballot, and the elected officials are resisting that effort. So we've got Attorney William Pangman to file the lawsuits, and he really isn't being paid. If he's successful in getting our lawsuit, if we win the lawsuit, then we win two things. Number one, we get term limits to be on the ballot for November or April if we can't make November. And number two, if we win the lawsuit, we would get attorney's fees, which would cover our fees, Wisconsin term limits fees, for our attorney, William Pangman.
Mm-hmm.
That,
Does that help you out, caller?
well, when you win, that comes, the money for the attorney's fees, that comes from taxpayers, then it'd have to, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
All right.
So it would be ideal if these elected officials in these cities and villages, these 18 cities and villages, would stop screwing around. We could put term limits on the ballot in November and then let the public have their say and be done with it, and take an up or down vote and get on with it. But what's happening now, those 18 cities are spending taxpayers' money to pay for their own attorneys, and then if we win this issue, they'll spend taxpayers' money to pay for our attorney, William Pangman. And that's a hell of a wasteful use of good money. I'd just as soon they'd put the term limits question on the November ballot, and then we wouldn't have to be fooling around like this.
Well, aren't they really being obstructionists in this process?
Oh, yeah, indeed they are.
If the people say, hey, we want it on the ballot, and handfuls of people in each one of these cities are saying no?
And we've gone through the lawful petition process as spelled out in State Statutes 9.20, the direct legislation petition process. So we have a problem with the city officials trying to derail the term limits question. I say put it on the ballot. What are they afraid of? Let's put it on the November ballot, see what the public says.
Does it have to go on each ballot separately, you know, for cities and...
Yes. Yes, it has to go on in Green Bay and Milwaukee and Thiensville and Cedarburg, Waukesha, Wauwatosa, all those places it has to go on individually where the citizens in those cities and villages petition to put it on.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, caller. You know, is there any cities now in the state that have any local municipalities that have term limits set up?
None that I'm aware of. The only term limits I know of are, they're sort of quasi-public officials, and that is the United States Coast Guard in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. You serve a 2-year term, and then you step down as the leader of that United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. And then there's, I think, the United Way. You have that fundraiser, and then the next time around it has to be a different person. So there's term limits, so to speak. Those are the only ones I know of in Wisconsin at this time.
So it seems like they're saying, hey, if we don't stop this thing now, it's going to get out of hand, and they're going to have term limits all over the state. So they're being obstructionists and fighting it getting on the ballot, because if it does, then it's the beginning of the end.
Indeed they are.
Kind of like George Wallace and them standing in the doorway down in Alabama and those places back in the 50s and 60s, trying to fight the tide that was coming against them. And
The term limit support in Wisconsin is very strong. It's 75% at the congressional level and tapers down to 66% at the local level. But even at the local level, still 2/3 of the public in Wisconsin supports term limits. So it's a very powerful public opinion, and it holds across all the groups that we know of. It holds across old and young, black and white, men and women, retired and working people. It's the only group of people that we can identify that are opposed to term limits significantly is elected officials.
mm-hmm. Well, we're going to take a call here, unless, Fred, you got something you wanted to ask real quick?
No, go ahead.
All right. How was your meeting tonight, Fred?
Good.
A lot of people there?
Enough. Not the full committee, but enough.
Okay. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, hey Chuck, how you doing?
All right.
Yeah, I've been watching your show for a while here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, who's that guy in the middle?
That's Michael Riley. He's the president of Wisconsin Term Limits. He's working on getting term limits in the state of Wisconsin, but he's part of a national movement.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Hey, Fred, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Oh, good. I was just wondering, are any of you guys related to Adolf Hitler?
How about some serious questions?
Yeah, well, we'll try that right now. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air. Hello?
Hello, yeah. Say, good program tonight.
Thank you.
Looking pretty sharp there, Fred.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, does your guest know anything about Steve Gunderson and Herb Kohl? Are they both alike?
Herb Kohl, I can tell you the relationship between Herb Kohl and term limits. Herb hinted that he favors term limits, but yet in a recorded roll call vote, he voted against term limits. So that's what I know about Herb Kohl and term limits.
How about Gunderson? You know anything on him, what he's pushing?
No, he's from the La Crosse area, and I haven't followed him closely.
Mm-hmm.
You might know a little.
Well, I think he's kind of at one time said 12 years, but he's already passed that, and so he's already worn out his own welcome if he was for 12-year term limits. But he's probably against it now that he's into his 14th year. So I'm not too sure where he's at on it right now.
I can check out the record and get back to you on that.
What's the chances of you guys actually getting something passed down there to get it on a November ballot?
We're not sure. We know it'll be on the. We know term limits. The question will be on the November ballot for at least 5 cities and villages, and that includes Oregon, North Bay, Watertown, Black Creek, and Rockdale. I'm not sure about that last one, but there's at least 5 cities and villages in Wisconsin that will have term limits on the ballot. The largest one being Watertown. Our lawsuit focuses on 18 different communities in that Milwaukee metro area, and some of them are rather large: Milwaukee, West Allis, Wauwatosa. And if we're successful, we hope to have term limits on the November ballot. I'm just not sure how the time frame is going to work out. We could be successful, and because of the logistics involved, the term limits question might end up on the April '95 ballot instead. We're hopeful that we can have term limits on the November ballot in these 18 cities that are named in the lawsuit, in addition to the 5 cities that have already scheduled term limits to be on the ballot.
Well, I hope we can get it in our state. How many states have this already?
If you're talking about congressional term limits, there are about 16 states that have voted to limit the terms of their Congress. So when those kick in, and then you'll have another 5, I believe 5 states that are voting on congressional term limits in this November. So you could have as many as 16 plus 5, 21 states that will have voted for and installed term limits for their Congress come November 8th.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think would be the main thing that we can profit from voting something like this in?
I think if you get term limits in, you're basically going to have a healthy rotation of new people into office. They're going to think more, elected officials then are going to think more about the private sector instead of seeing government as a solution to all our problems. So term limits is going to have some very good effects if we can put it in place for Congress, for the state legislature, and for local officials.
Well, I'm all for it. Well, good program, guys. Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, this Congress is kind of like it's an imperial Congress. Over the years now, it's upwards of 90-95% of them keep getting reelected. The only time they leave is when they decide to quit, or they die, or they get such heavy indictments against them they have to leave. But not only term limits, but there's other things too. They've got all these perks and special interests are pouring money into them, and the franking privileges and the mass mailings and the PAC money, and it just goes on and on, all the special perks and the limousines and the private, they used to have their own private bank. I don't know, now they've kind of quieted down on that. They had their own private post office that our poster boy, Rostenkowski, got in trouble over, and it just seems that they've just built this empire around themselves, and they don't leave unless they want to. I mean, it's so lopsided. The playing field is like they're up on a hill and you're down here in the valley, and you're trying to go up the hill to beat them. And it's just so, the playing field is nowhere near being equal. Do you think term limits will help equal that out?
Oh, you bet.
Break up the imperialism of it.
See, the incumbents, the congressional incumbents or the state legislature or even local elected officials have four distinct advantages. They have political action committees typically work to support the incumbents only. They don't work to support challengers. The publicity always favors the incumbent. The incumbent has name recognition and high profile in the media, and the challengers don't. The staff of an incumbent will typically work for his re-election. And you also have special interest groups that have benefited by legislation passed by the incumbents. And so those special interest groups will typically work to re-elect the incumbent. So the incumbent has four distinct advantages that the challengers don't have. So term limits is the only way that we know of to level the playing field and have the challengers equal to the incumbents.
You know, I'm personally not for taking more federal money and giving it to all of these candidates to run. I would just like to see it evened up to where the playing field's more even, to where a millionaire can't come in and buy an election, or on the other hand, you just have frivolous candidates that have no really don't want to win. But I think that if you get it to where the government's footing the bill for all the campaigning, then you get in trouble there too, because first of all, it's going to create another massive bureaucracy to take care of it, and it's taking more tax dollars away from people. So I'm for leveling it up the playing field, but also still relying on individual donors instead of the PAC's special interests and all that to elect people.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would do away with PAC funding, and I also would. But term limits is the one big reform we really need. If you could do term limits, you're really on the way to getting a citizen government, and that's what we really need. We need a citizen government instead of professional politicians.
Wasn't there one time where they just came to Washington for a few months, did your business, and then went back to farming and their law firms, and now it's full-time business for them.
You bet. It goes 12 months out of the year now.
And it seems like they waste an inordinate amount of time just piddling around doing nothing, and then the last few months, boy, they just scurry and hurry to get all this legislation pushed through.
And one gentleman said, hey, some federal representatives said, hey, let's have a citizen legislature in Congress. Let's take and cut their salaries in half and cut the year in half, so that the congressman would only go there 6 months, get done the necessary business, and then go home, return back to their home state, instead of going there for 12 months voting on all kinds of regulation and taxation. And I like the idea of a citizen Congress, too.
Well, we'll try and take another call here. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
You know, I say, Chuck, I'd like to get that date that you're going to be at the candidates forum again, and I was wondering, is Penny Graham going to let you talk, or what's the deal on that?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, on Fred's show about a week ago, Fred, and then on my show on Monday, we discussed that. Well, after the show last Monday, the show was over 3, I went to my office across from the post office downtown, and there was a call on the answer machine that said that I'd been invited to the League of Women Voters debate here in Eau Claire, and that kind of broke it down. And then I got a call from the League of Women Voters in La Crosse. I've been invited to that one. Then I got a call from the League of Women Voters in River Falls. I've been invited to that one. So we kind of tore down that barrier that was there. So now I've been invited to 3, and there's another one that's in the works in Platteville that the 2 main candidates are trying to, it looks like they're trying to pull a fast one on. So I've discussed that with the university down in Platteville, and we're working on getting that one to be equal and fair and open and honest. Right now it's just 2 candidates invited to that one, but otherwise they're starting to open it up.
Can you get the,
I've got a date here for you.
can you tell us the time and date that's going to be at North
Sure.
High?
This debate is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Eau Claire County and the Western Wisconsin Press Club. It will be held on October 17th at North High Auditorium, 7 to 8:30 p.m.
Okay, now I got another question.
All right.
They're trying to attract a NFL team, namely the Tampa Bay team, to Eau Claire. I guess the officials met with the city manager was here. But since then, we've put the rubber and the manure down over at Carson Park. And if you read the article in the Buckley's column, he elaborates on that. Do you think we'll get a team with all that smell over there and grease the kids got to play on? Whose idea was that, and what does it cost us?
Well, it sounds like one of those environmental things that went wrong, recycling deals that just didn't pan out.
That the Van Ees that caused that, you think?
I don't know, but they better clean it up. But I think the Tampa Bay would use the university field, so we'd be safe there. Hopefully we can get that in there because it brings in revenue. People, it generates money for everything, for food,
Well,
hotels.
the universities to talk. Are you going to try to get in there and register a lot of these students so they might vote for you?
Well, you know, it's easy to register now in Wisconsin and across the nation. I mean, they got the motor voter bill now. That's been passed, isn't it, Fred?
Yes.
So it's easy. There's ease of registration there, and all the student has to do on election day is bring his electric bill or proof of where he's living in the district, and
I think you ought to talk to the professor and see if you couldn't give a little talk there in the political science class, you know.
well, that's a monolithic leftist system out there. I hope they would open it up.
Invite you down, or would you appear?
Sure, I'll go into that Lion's Den there. It'd probably be fun.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Well, I think we still got about, according to my clock in here, about 6-7 minutes. So we had another call waiting. We might as well clear that up. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, Chuck and the other guy sitting there at the bench. How you guys doing tonight?
Fine. How are you?
Not too shabby myself. Just come in from working on my car and I happened to see your guys and started watching you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have this little problem here. I think your hairpiece is walking off, dude. You'd better go catch it.
Yeah? Huh. What was he talking about?
A lot of good callers tonight.
I know. When college gets back in, we get a little bit of all the fruits and nuts out there, and it makes it interesting. So, Fred, now, we got 5 minutes left. Fred, you got to have one more question on these term limits anyway.
Well, I think that Mike Riley has been doing a good job in explaining this, why we need it, and the advantages of having it. And we really need the term limits if we're going to straighten up some of this mess that we have.
There's another interesting thing, too, about term limits. I see that there is a congressman that has introduced a bill that would provide for a nationwide non-binding referendum on term limits. That's H.R. 3835. So that has 57 co-sponsors so far. So maybe we'll have a nationwide non-binding referendum on the issue. I think that would further elevate this issue in the minds of the public so that we could get term limits in the end. Our end result would be that we would get term limits in place for our congressmen.
would that, they wouldn't, you think they still have time to put it on the November ballot? Since that's a nationwide ballot.
Probably not. It would probably have to go on the April 95 ballot or a later ballot.
Okay, we'll try and see if we got any more calls here. Go ahead, call. Whoops. Okay, we got, the lines are clear. The callers are the operators are eagerly awaiting your calls in the other room. And Fred, I think you had something there that you wanted to tell the viewers about something in your newspaper there.
That's right. It's from the Wanderer, which is printed in St. Paul, and it's a Catholic lay paper, and it says, abortionist and wife arrested on child porn charges. Rockford, Illinois, Northern Illinois abortionist Richard Ragsdale and his wife Deborah DeMars were arrested by Rockford police Thursday, September 22nd on charges of child pornography. Ragsdale, 59, was charged with possession of child pornography, a Class 4 felony which carries a sentence of up to 3 years in prison. DeMars, 46, was charged with child pornography, a Class 1 felony, punishable, I should say, by up to 15 years in prison. The couple's foster child, a 3-year-old, was photographed by DeMars in adult-like sexual poses and various stages of undress, was placed in custody of the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. Thursday evening, their natural child, a young boy, was also removed from their home and placed with relatives. Rather interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, somewhere on that same vein, Fred, is I got the recent issue of the Banner, which is a Pro-Life Wisconsin newsletter, and they've listed me as the candidate in the 3rd Congressional District that is in favor of the Paramount Human Life Amendment. And the question was, when asked if they would support passage of the Paramount Human Life Amendment, which would guarantee the right to life of all innocent human beings without exception, the following candidates answered yes. And for the 3rd District, they've got my name in there, Fred.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
and now,
good.
Pro-Life Wisconsin can't actually endorse because they're kind of like your organization. They're not allowed to. But they can put out comparison sheets and things like that.
Sure, public information.
Uh-huh. So that just came in today's mail. So Fred, we're down to about 1 more minute. And Mike, I want to thank you for coming all the way up from Milwaukee. We appreciate that. And I'm sure you've enlightened the viewers a little bit on this whole thing about term limits, because it seems to be really heating up in a lot of states around the nation, and right here in Wisconsin, it's turned into a battleground over that issue.
Indeed, and if citizens want to find out any more about term limits, they can call us at our headquarters, and I'm wondering if we've got that number somewhere.
Yep.
Yes. Citizens can call us at our Wisconsin Term Limits headquarters in Milwaukee if they desire to find out any information about how they could petition for term limits in their area. Our number is 1-800-303-1146. That's Wisconsin Term Limits, 1-800-303-1146.
And once again on that poster, there's an 800 number for that poster there. If people would like to get their very own free poster there with Rostenkowski on it, the poster child for the 1994 term limits poster child, and that number is?
And that number for the free term limits poster is 1-800-TERMS-94. 1-800-TERMS-94.
Okay, well, once again, we're out of time, and we appreciate your tuning in, and we'll see you again right here on the Cow Report, right next Monday at 2 p.m. And by the way, this is my real hair, and I think everyone else's real hair. None of us are wearing toupees up here. At least I don't think I am. So we want to thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
And you'll see the Conservative Corner on Friday at 8 o'clock next week, the 14th.
Okay. Thanks a lot to Chris and Cliff Economaki, Roy Rogers Hoff, and the rest of the crew. We'll see you next week. Good evening.